Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. In today's episode, Paul talks about his 1-2-3-4 approach to honoring the pain teacher, as well as strategies a skilled shaman would use to teach you about your relationship with pain and healing. He will also discuss the nature of choice and how the pain teacher comes to teach us how to balance ourselves.
Hello, this is Paul Chek. Welcome to Shamanic Approaches and the Chek Strategy for Healing Pain. In this, Part 4 of the Pain Teacher series, I will cover the Chek 1-2-3-4 approach to honoring the pain teacher, what soul and spirit actually are. And that is a very important clarification because there is a lot of pain based on confusion of religious ideology and programmed behaviors that can really be alleviated when we really understand what soul and spirit actually are. Then we'll get into the 5 essential questions a skilled shaman will ask and what your answers to them can tell you about the etiology of your own pain. And hopefully by understanding those questions, I can be your virtual shaman and you can really be present with your answers. And the answers carry the solution. So I hope you enjoy this, the final part of the Pain Teacher series. And I'm really excited to hear your feedback. If you'd like more of this type of information, let me know. If you love this podcast, share it with everybody. I'm excited to grow the podcast and share my love with the world. And when you pass it on, you're sharing your love with the world. And if we all work together, we can make the world a more beautiful place for everybody and the children each day. So I hope you enjoy the podcast. All right, well, welcome to Part 4, our final segment of Lessons from the Pain Teacher. I'm excited that you're with me if you've been with me this far. If you haven't listened to the previous 3 segments of this podcast series, I highly recommend it because they each contain very, very important and useful information to help you live and love more fully and experience less pain and more freedom. Today we're going to get into the 1-2-3-4 approach to honoring the pain teacher, which is based on the model that I developed quite a number of years ago now and is the basis of all Chek Institute teachings and how Chek professionals are trained to analyze a case and design whether it be conditioning or diet and lifestyle or overall wellness programs. So I've got lots of interesting things to share with you today. So let's get started. I'll give you a quick overview of the 1-2-3-4. 1 represents one love. What is your dream, goal, or objective that you're willing to grow for or change for? 2 represents the 2 forces that create life in the universe, which are the empty yin and the full yang. And we look at how we're out of balance in that regard relative to our stated dream, goal, or objective. 3 is the only 3 choices we can make in relationship to any person, place, or thing. And 4 is our 4 doctor categories of values. Dr. Happy, Dr. Diet, Dr. Movement, and Dr. Quiet. Now, though some of you listening to my podcast will be Chek professionals and familiar with the model, don't be fooled into thinking I'm just going to be giving you the same old stuff because this is a 1-2-3-4 approach to honoring the pain teacher. So let's begin with one love, dream, or goal. Now, it's important to remember that some people may not have a dream. They may not realize what is their dream for their life right now or their overarching dream for their life, which is a legacy. But we all need and benefit greatly from goals and objectives. And there's a mountain of research on what happens when people do or do not have goals. And I cover that quite clearly in PPS Success Mastery Lesson 3, which is all about goal setting. And highly recommend it to all of you who want help being more efficient with what you're creating in your life. Now, before I expand on the nature of one love as dream or goal, it's important to establish what I mean when I'm using such terms as soul or spirit, because these concepts are very important, particularly when it comes to the pain teacher, because 85% of the world population claims religious affiliation, which means they have some belief in God. And in all religions, there's a Holy Trinity. In Christianity, the Holy Trinity is Father at the top. Just imagine a triangle, Son bottom left, and Holy Ghost on the right. A correlate of that would be the Hindu Trinity, which is Brahma on the top, Vishnu on the bottom left, and Shiva on the bottom right. Brahma is the equivalent of God. Vishnu is the great maintainer, and you have to have something to maintain, so that would equate to body or matter or objects, things. And then Shiva is the great transformer. So you could say, in another way, in a Taoist way of looking at it, the Tao would be at the top, Yin would be the bottom left, and Yang would be the bottom right. Each of the world's great religions has its own trinity of some form. So when I'm using the term soul, the soul is the feminine, receptive, feeling nature within any sentient being. Soul is what feels our feelings and listens to what we are hearing, knows what we know, and sees what we are seeing. Now, to help clarify that a little bit, when you're hearing me talk right now, your tympanic membrane or eardrum is vibrating, which is causing signals to be sent into your brain, which are really analog waves being transformed into a variety of on-off signals and nerves, which turns out to be quite digital in many ways. That's hearing. But the soul is what's listening. When you hear me, it's your soul that generates the feelings that might be, I'm hearing truth or wisdom right now, or that makes me feel insecure about myself, or etc. Now, the mind is also involved because you can't really separate the soul from the mind, simply because any experience that your soul's having can only be interpreted through your own mind. But the key point here is to think of the soul as the feminine element in creation, which is that which is receiving and experiencing. And it is through those experiences that we share through the collective consciousness what our experiences are and what we've learned. And those experiences help each other or help all of us because we have access to them unconsciously and they are influencing us. And there's actually some great research looking into this. For example, Rupert Sheldrake's done research showing that when animals, such as birds or other creatures, learn new skills, that they are passed on to the offspring, even on the other side of the world with no contact. Some of you may have heard of the 100th monkey concept, which basically, in summary, says that by about the 100th time somebody saw a monkey washing a potato for the first time, which they don't normally do, all of a sudden researchers all over the world started seeing monkeys washing potatoes, which they hadn't previously done. Now, to get into the actual exact details of the 100th monkey syndrome type thing would be a bit of a discussion, but in general context, that's what it means. Now, spirit is the flow of energy and information that animates all creation and is the masculine component to our feminine soul nature. Spirit is the action principle, or as Osho would say, spirit is the dance within the dancer. You could also say spirit is akin to the Holy Ghost. As Osho says, you can cut open the dancer, but you will not find the dance. Spirit is that invisible yet real force. Spirit is potential moving. So when we are thinking thoughts or deciding to do things, making choices, we are moving potential into action, and thereby it becomes spirit. Spirit is also created when emptiness becomes fullness and fullness becomes emptiness. So on the grand universal scheme, quantum particles are popping out of emptiness at random, becoming matter, and the accretion of those quantum particles produces atoms, which produce objects and produce molecules and cells and organs and systems and organisms. So we can see that spirit is the flow of energy and information or potential into action that carries the energy and information that produces, we'll call them bodies that are sentient and have an experience. And that experience is the experience of the soul. And at the level of the one mind, that which is the source of all creation, the soul is what's sharing its experiences within the one mind, and it is the flow of spirit into our soul that gives us an experience which we then share as spirit or energy and information with the collective, which then informs us and can significantly, or it depends on the degree, but it can be a minor or a major influence on our soul experience depending on what energy and information you're taking into you and how you're acting it out. So while the soul is the joy, ecstasy, feeling, and awareness that the dance is moving through us, spirit is, shall we say, the energy, the information, the rhythm that we're dancing to, and the ideas that we're expressing through our words and the experience of saying those words or living them in dance. Now, with that preface, it comes, when it comes to step one of the Chek 4-step model of living well, if you don't know what your dream or goal is, but you know that you're in pain, I always suggest that you identify what your nightmare is, because that holds the greatest amount of energy and information that is entangled within you. In other words, it's not free, which means it's going to keep recreating the same experiences, right? If you, for example, if the 7 button on your calculator is stuck down, then every single calculation you do is out by a factor of 7. So what that means is when you have a nightmare, it's like having a 7 button stuck down, and no matter what you do, that nightmare or 7 is always a factor of the experience you're having, which can lead people to depression, because no matter how hard they seem to try to get better, they don't realize they have these unconscious buttons being pushed or that are stuck. So when we work on resolving our nightmare and listen carefully to what the pain teacher is bringing us awareness of, then we have a far better chance of healing and growing and cultivating wisdom that we can use to support the creation of our dreams and make more love and share that with other people. When we do what we convince ourselves that we have to do to make money or anything else, we put ourselves in the position of a child. We can easily feel controlled, manipulated, or doomed to a humdrum life. And that is a great way to acquire addictions as coping mechanisms. So think of how many people come home from work and go straight to a bottle to take the edge off. We can't start resenting others. We can start resenting others that are living their dreams because we look at them and they seem like they're having a better time than we are. And we keep telling ourselves, I have to stay in this job. I have to stay in this marriage. I have to keep doing this with my money, whatever the story might be. And we might find ourselves using comments like, oh, they're just lucky, or they have rich parents. But the reality is that everyone's life is a product of choices, be they unconscious or conscious. When we use the words I choose to, it makes us an adult. So the same situation, I have to stay in this job, which is the words of a child, can be restated as I choose to stay in this job, knowing that we all have a choice. We have a choice to live every moment of the day. Any one of us can commit suicide at every time. So we even have the choice to stay alive in our physical body. So it comes right down to choices. The question is, are we doing it consciously or unconsciously? Are we making our own choices? Are we acting out programming, which I'll get into when I talk about the ego? So when we replace I have to with I choose to, we can begin to get a very clear picture of what we are creating. And awareness is always a prerequisite for change. And the reality of it is, if we can't change, we can't learn or grow. So a little slogan I have is, if you can't change, you can't grow. And if you can't grow, you can't change. So it's like a self-supporting feedback loop, a negative feedback loop. When we don't listen to our heart, our feelings, our values, we're at great risk of soul loss. Soul loss means that we have to bury our pain. We have to bury our insecurities. We have to bury painful judgments of others, often people that we love. We have to deny parts of ourselves that may be way more sexually explicit than we think people around us can handle. We have to deny all sorts of parts of ourselves, from it be our judgments or our criticisms of people that we love. And to the degree that we can't skillfully express those in ways that are acts of love and a willingness to support the other person, then as a coping strategy, especially if you're caught in the position of a child archetypally, the normal habit we have is to bury these emotions, bury these thoughts, feelings, and judgments. When you bury those things, you entangle those into your body, and they keep working on you from the inside unconsciously, and it leads to lots of problems, which we'll get a little bit more into shortly. We often stop inhabiting ourselves wherever in our body we store repressed thoughts, feelings, or emotions. So, for example, if you have the thought, so-and-so makes you sick to your stomach, well, eventually you're going to create pain in your stomach, and you're going to want to avoid the pain, so you're going to actually start pulling your consciousness away from your stomach, which means you won't be aware of the cues or the messages that the stomach's sending you to try to inspire you to make diet or lifestyle changes or emotional or thinking changes that are negatively impacting the stomach. And that's how a tremendous amount of disease gets started. It starts because we keep running disease-making programs, even when we're telling ourselves that we're taking the right supplements, doing the right exercises, not realizing that the unconscious mind is something like 1,000,000 times more powerful than the conscious mind, and the supplements and things like that are conscious choices. So it's kind of like shooting an elephant with a BB gun. It very seldom works, and it may give you some palliative care, but not much. So where we have soul loss, we have denied things for ourselves or others, and that leads to unconsciousness. This opens the door to fatigue, illness, and disease, and you can rest assured the pain teacher will there to meet you and inspire you to awaken and grow, so that you can get the best from yourself, or at least die well. So these are very important concepts. And when we do the work and listen to the pain teacher, we are generally guided to cultivating a greater sense of meaning and value in life. And those that have a great sense of meaning and value are far less susceptible to chronic ailments and illnesses and diseases, because those that have a great sense of meaning and value are typically more coherent at every level. And dis-ease is really chaos. Coherence is order. So where we have a lot of conscious or unconscious challenges with the pain teacher, we could say we are generating chaos. And where there's chaos, there's usually not a sense of meaning or value or order. So as we grow through working with the pain teacher consciously, we create more harmony and order. And those that have a dream, goal, or objective that produces meaning and value are far more likely to engage the pain teacher in positive ways that ultimately help them at every level of their being. Hi, everybody. I sure hope you're enjoying my Pain Teacher series. I really felt compelled to share what I've learned as a therapist, strength and conditioning specialist, and life coach now for 36 years with regard to the benefits of pain and the ways it can awaken us to making better choices, being less unconscious, and move naturally and efficiently towards enlightenment or awakening experiences that help us feel more connected to ourselves, to others in the world. In fact, you may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is probably one of the most referenced diagrams or systems of understanding people's needs in psychology and almost any branch of health or medicine that's out there. At the bottom of the pyramid is physiological needs, which is air, food, water, shelter, clothing, and sleep. Then the next level up is safety and security needs, such as health, employment, property, family, and stability. And then it goes up to love and belongingness needs, followed by self-esteem needs. And at the top of the pyramid is self-actualization needs. Now, I bring this up because there's something very important here. At the bottom, we see the very kind of basics I'm talking about in my holistic lifestyle coaching program all the time: air, breathing, food, water, and those are very important things. And if you go up, then you have the importance of your health, your family, and those things are essential to our stability. And as you've heard me say many times in my podcasts, and for those of you that are students of the Chek Institute, the health of our body is very dependent upon the food we eat, and the health of the planet is very linked to the food that we grow. Because if we grow organically, then we're not poisoning the planet and unnecessarily torturing nature. And there's no better way to take care of your health needs with regard to food than organic food, which is why I love Organifi's products. If you are interested in some excellent high-quality products that are easy to prepare, you can't do better than Organifi. Organifi has an awesome offer called the Complete Health Bundle, which includes their awesome green juice, which is a great detox product that helps bring energy levels up, cortisol levels down. Is a great way to get your day started. They have their red juice, which is a lovely combination of ingredients that will give you a nice boost of metabolism, or therefore your energy. And they also include organic gold, which is great for calming and soothing yourself at the end of the day and for a great night's sleep. They also have an awesome probiotic and an excellent high-quality organic protein powder. And when you mix those together, you've got your microbiome taken care of, you got your body's protein needs met, and you've got your detox needs met, and you've got inflammation control and relaxation. That is how you build the base of your pyramid with healthy food and make real good changes, not only for the family, but contribute to the earth. If you want to try out Organifi, I'm really confident you're going to love it. Go to Organifi.com, Organifi.com. And at checkout, use the code Chek20. That's all caps, capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 20. And if you have not listened to my podcast with the founder of Organifi, it's number 64, Drew Canoli. The title is You Be You. I think you're going to really, really love Drew, his values, his mission, his book, You Be You, is awesome. So if you want to get to know the man behind the products, which to me means a lot, not only should you check out Organifi.com and take advantage of your discount code Chek20, as I said, but have a listen to this amazing man and see how he built this company and the values behind it. I think when you get to know Drew, you're going to know why I love him and his products so much. Enjoy. I'd love to hear your feedback. Now, the next thing I'd like to discuss under the heading of One Love is the ego, which really is sort of often referred to as the executor. It is the aspect of our consciousness that makes our conscious choices when it's conscious. So, the ego is a word that's commonly used, but I think we should define it. One of the ways to define the ego is one's sense of border, barrier, or self-definition. We all know when someone's touching us. We know when our perceived psychological barriers are being crossed. Most of us have a comfortable distance. If someone's talking to you and their nose is pressed right up against yours, you may feel like you're being invaded, and that's your ego sensing that. Our sense of self-definition is our perceptions of who we are, how we define ourselves. Another aspect of the ego, or way of defining it, is referred to as an ideaplex. Our ego doesn't fully form in ideal circumstances till about 21 years of age. Some researchers say longer. When we're born, we don't really have a conscious mind. We pick up language, which becomes the foundation of our way of communicating our feelings and thoughts to others. But when we're growing and developing as children, we are learning all sorts of things about what to and not to do, what to touch, what not to touch, what's sharp, what's hot, what's dangerous. And all the while, we're picking up ideas that become basically programs within our nervous system that tell us things. So we learn, what we're told God is. We learn mathematics. We learn all the basic stuff in school. All of those create an ideaplex, which ultimately creates your way of perceiving the world and yourself and other people, which can radically vary from culture to culture and family to family. The key thing to remember is that an ideaplex is a complex of a myriad of ideas that are linked in networks by association. So, for example, if somebody uses the word God, whatever your pre-programmed ideas of what God is or isn't will automatically be projected onto the word God, even though someone may have a very different interpretation or intention with the use of the word God while they're speaking to you, because they have a different ideaplex. And a lot of what causes challenges between people is that their ideaplex has different interpretations of everything from gestures to postures to words to interpretations of things like work hard or eat well, that can mean something very different from one person to the next. One person might think eating well is having all the Twinkies you can get your hands on. Another one thinks it means organic food, for example. The key thing to remember is that without our ideas, our ways of interpreting things and expressing them linguistically, we're really in a state of unconsciousness, like a child. Remember, a child will pee and poop all over itself because it doesn't know any better, and it'll poop all over the couch because it doesn't know the difference between the couch and its body. It has no idea complex to separate the idea of couch from body. So this should be something that alerts you, because a lot of the pain we have in relationships to ourselves or others is based on our interpretations of our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and values, both within ourselves and in relationships. And when those beliefs actually come into conflict within ourselves or within others, the pain teacher shows up. Unfortunately, most people's response to that is to try to drug it or medicate it in some way, or drink alcohol or blame the other person, and we'll get into these issues shortly. Now, another way to understand the ego and its sort of illusory nature is to just look at yourself through the concept of the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. If I ask you to hold your hand up right now, which I'm asking you to do, and look at it and pretend I'm standing there with you, and I ask you this question, what are you looking at? Well, 99.99% of people will say, my hand. So the key thing to remember is they're using a possessive, my hand, my body. Then you have to ask the question, well, who is it that's in possession of the hand? Well, they think it's their ego, but the reality of it is that's just their sense of self. The key point I'm trying to make is it's clear that the sense of self is distinguishable from the body because we use possessives to define our body or ourself. My idea, my clothes, my shoes, my underwear, my knee, my foot, whatever. So when you ask yourself, well, what am I really? You can say, well, how much water am I? Well, the average person's around 55 to 70% water. How much earth am I? Well, the structure of your body and the tissues of your body correlate to the earth element. So you could guess at whatever that would be. So we know we're about 70% water, we're X% earth. How much fire am I? Well, that would be your metabolism. Well, you could say I'm X percentage of metabolism. How much air are you? How much oxygen and air, or the gases in the air, are there? X amount. So what you find out is that most of what people think they are, when they break it down into elements, creates an interesting conundrum, because even though they can now see that what they think of as themselves, i.e. their body, is a collection of elements in very elaborate combinations, there's still a sense of self there. So if I said to you, if I removed all those elements, where would you be? Well, quite interestingly, you'd be everywhere and nowhere, because you would have no body. So your sense of self is quite an illusion, because you're not the elements that make up your body. They come from the earth and the surrounding environment, and they're constantly being exchanged. We turn over every cell in our body every year. So we're really more like a fountain, a waterfall, a water fountain that's constantly flowing, yet if you stand at a distance, it looks like a tree of ice. And as you move forward, you realize it's moving. So everything in us is moving. Everything we eat and drink and breathe comes from outside of us to create what we think of as the inside of ourselves or within our body. So this is one way to realize that when you're overly identified with your body as yourself, it creates an illusion which can lead to hypochondria, narcissism, neuroticism, and all sorts of things. But that sense of self is a very important illusion because it allows you to have the experience of interacting with and sharing love with other people. If love is the flow of energy and information through empathic and compassionate connection to self or other, then there has to be a perceived sense of self, which is subjective. You can't pin it down. And there has to be a perceived perception of the other or the object of your love. If you say, I love you, Mary, then Mary is the object of your love. If neither of you had an ego, then you wouldn't know the difference between Mary and you, just like the child or the infant doesn't know the difference between the couch or the bed and itself. So the ego is a very, very important illusion because it allows the experience of love and it carries what we call consciousness, but it only carries a small percentage of consciousness. Of our total consciousness, researchers have found that what we constitute as our ego is really only about 5 to 7% of our total consciousness. One definition of consciousness is the total information carrying capacity of a system. So the ego really only processes in consciousness about 5 to 7% of the total flow of information in your being at any given time. So in actual fact, the ego really is more like a flashlight. It's more like an iceberg where the tip of the iceberg sticking out of the water, but the unconscious is the rest of the iceberg. And the unconscious has far, far more information processing capacity. Consider that current research and people like Nassim Haramein say that there's 30 billion biochemical reactions a second in your body. You have about 100 trillion cells. Each cell is made of about 100 trillion atoms. So imagine the amount of processing power that it takes to keep that organization together, keep your heart beating, keep you breathing, digesting, metabolizing, assimilating, and eliminating. Then you get a glimpse at the power of the unconscious mind relative to that tiny little stream of consciousness that we tend to fall in love with and identify ourselves with, which leads us to all sorts of visitations from the pain teacher. Now, if you imagine that your ego is like a flashlight and your unconscious is more like the dark, that's why you're unconscious of it, then you'll surely have had the experience of using a flashlight and know that any narrow beam of light will cast a shadow. So we all have a shadow that is created in concert with the formation of our ego. When we make a dream or goal decision from our ego without including our soul's wisdom, instincts, feelings, and values, listening to our deep emotional responses, or using our crystal ball, meaning it's a metaphor for asking yourself, well, if I make this decision, what will my life be like in 3 weeks? What will my life be like in a month, a year, 3 years, etc.? Then we end up getting what we create with the power of our choices, but the pain teacher often arrives to show us what we've created unconsciously. The soul includes all elements of the consciousness, from the unconscious to the conscious to the superconscious or the higher self. When we make choices with our ego alone, because we're making choices from such a small amount of the total information available, we invite the pain teacher, and the pain teacher generally shows us what we have created unconsciously. Hi, this is Paul. In my career, when I've worked with a wide variety of people that ate top quality organic foods and supplements, such as elite athletes, but still had chronic challenges with digestion, elimination, and detoxification, I showed them that they were not digesting, metabolizing, assimilating, or eliminating their foodstuffs effectively, and turned them on to high-quality digestive enzymes, probiotics, and natural energy enhancement products, such as Bioptimizer's unique Capex enzymes to stimulate mitochondrial energy production and help break down flesh foods. And we got rid of their fungal and parasite infections, and their energy levels, sleep quality, and mental clarity consistently improved. In fact, you can get anti-parasite support through Bioptimizers as well. I know of no better place for excellent digestive enzymes, probiotics, and energy enhancement support than the products offered at Bioptimizers. I use them daily myself. Living 4D with Paul Chek listeners get a huge 27% discount on the upgraded digestion package consisting of 4 Bioptimizers products that I personally use. Get your digestion, energy levels, and metabolism optimized by going to bioptimizers.com/4, capital D, capital L, and use the code CHEK10. That's capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 10, CHEK10, and that's bioptimizers.com, bioptimizers.com/4 and capital D followed by capital L. Checkout code for your awesome 27% discount is CHEK10. And for an amazing learning experience and to meet the co-founder of Bioptimizers, go to my Living 4D with Paul Chek episode 55, Wade Lightheart, Digestion, Enzymes, Probiotics, and Enhanced Well-Being. You will truly be amazed at the deep wisdom and beauty of Wade Lightheart. I absolutely love this guy and can't wait to interview him again. I hope you enjoy the podcast. I hope you enjoy Bioptimizer's products, and I always love hearing your feedback. Enjoy. Now, the shadow is a word that's being used a lot today, but the shadow is really the parts of ourselves that we deny or that we don't want to look at or acknowledge because somehow it demeans us or creates the feeling that we don't fit in or that there's something weird about us. But this is all based on social conditioning. It's very, very important to remember, as the excellent author and teacher Robert A. Johnson, a Jungian analyst, teaches in his works, that whenever you enculturate a human being, you create a shadow by necessity. So whenever we're enculturated, we are taught what we can and cannot do. We don't want to deviate too much from the consensus norm, or people will attack us or arrest us for whatever it might be. It would be out of the cultural norm to have sex with your girlfriend in the middle of the shopping mall. That's not considered culturally correct in most cultures. So when we have this urge, we have to repress it. If you have a tendency to pick your nose and you do it a lot in public, well, people will think you're rude or disgusting. But the reality of picking your nose is just picking your nose. But if a culture sees that as a shallow or childish behavior, then you have to hide that you're picking your nose so that you don't stand out and look foolish based on cultural norms. So whatever we have to deny about our sexuality, our creativity, our beliefs about God or religion or life, or even if you have ideas that go against the norm in school or mainstream thought regarding science or any aspect, you're going to have to deny those to the degree that you need to feel safe and not get ostracized. And there's a long history of people with excellent ideas that were out of the box that got burned or tortured or anything. All you got to do is look at the history of mystics in any of the religions, and they're a great example of people that were out of the box. A shaman is someone who, by definition, is out of the box because they have less shadow in general. They are more authentic in their expressions of themselves. But it's also well known that shaman rarely ever live with the tribe. They live outside of the tribe so they don't get enculturated and they don't fall into the unconscious shadow trap of denying the parts of themselves that they need to keep whole so that their conscious perception is authentic and accurate, and they don't have filters that stop them from perceiving what's really going on inside of those people that are enculturated. And we will talk more about the shamanic approach to avoiding visits from the pain teacher as we go. But being aware of our shadow requires what I call spiritual courage. You have to be brave enough to look into yourself. An example is looking at what your real sexual urges and desires are versus what you share with other people. Looking at what your real desires are about what you want to do with your body in general. Looking what your real beliefs are about God versus what you share. There's many people sitting in churches, temples, and synagogues all over the world who don't really want to be there, but they've been programmed that they have to be there or they're going to be burned in hell or their family will be disgraced, etc. So while they're sitting there, they might be thinking in their head, this is just a bunch of silly shit. I wish the hell I could get out of here. But the fact that they're not and they're saying that means that they're expressing their shadow. So when we pay close attention to the pattern of pain and challenges within ourselves and our relationships and our judgments, we can easily meet our shadow. If you want to find your shadow, it's very easy. Just look at any judgment that you hold against other people. So if you think gay people are bad or disgusting, then there's your shadow. And to heal that, you would need to find the gay person within yourself. And if you're listening to me right now and saying something like, well, there's no gay person in me, well, then you haven't looked very deeply and you're still not mature enough to really find out the truth about yourself, because if it's happening around you and it's fairly common, it's probably real in you. And I could give you a long list of examples, but this is where spiritual courage comes in. If you're judging other people for their gayness, then you already have something that you are repressing. Now, this is deep stuff, and most people deny a lot of this stuff, but that's exactly what enculturation is, and that's why they have a shadow, and that's why they have all sorts of challenges in relationships and in challenges with themselves, and a long, long list of things that go on every day that make the medical system very wealthy because of all this repression. Whatever we repress, we just compress, and eventually it blows out. And it may blow out through alcohol addiction. It may blow out through secret pornography addictions. It may blow out through cutting yourself or denying yourself or abusing yourself or not loving yourself. All those are examples of the pain teacher coming to bring you into more consciousness of what you're creating. So shadow healing requires bringing what is unconscious into the conscious so that what was subjective, there but not identifiable, becomes objective. So when you find the gay person in yourself, even though you don't like to think that you're gay or admit that you're gay, then what was once subjective or in the shadow becomes objective. And now whenever you find yourself judging gay people, you can say, there's the repressed gay person in me that does not want to be ostracized and is projecting their fear of connecting to that part of themselves onto somebody else to create the illusion that they don't have that within themselves. Now, one of the techniques I teach for healing these types of things is one I learned from Stanley Krippner's work. It's called Name It, Blame It, and Tame It, which I talked about in my Evolve Yourself series. I believe I talked about that in the Evolve Your Mind section. So if you have this tendency to judge fat people or judge gay people or judge anybody that's different than you or has different life practices, sex practices, ways of relating, or cultural practices, once you feel the judge rising up in you and judging, say, there's my anti-gay person. Then you blame it. When I judge other people for being gay or being fat, etc., I'm actually creating the illusion of separation from them, as though somehow I can do that without it harming me and only harm them. So you say, when I judge people like that, I cut myself off from them. I create an illusion. Or when I judge people as being fat and I'm really in touch with my feelings, I feel sad or I feel ashamed that I'm being critical of another human being who may be doing their very best with the information, the knowledge, or the skills that they have. Then you tame it. Thank you, dear soul, for showing me where I have a mind virus regarding whatever it is that you're judging. And then you state what your dream is. My dream is not to see fat people as less whole than I am, but to create a mental, emotional space of acceptance, of empathy and compassion for them. And instead of judging them, you can observe them and say, there's someone who must be really uncomfortable in their body and be very scared because nobody probably wants to look and feel that way. So it helps to identify what your dream is. My dream is to feel safe with anybody and not have to judge them and create the illusion of separation. Then you flip it over and tame it. That's a fat person that's disgusting. Flipped over becomes, there's someone who's probably doing the best they can do with the knowledge and skills that they have and is probably uncomfortable. And I really hope that they can find a wholeness and freedom and be more like me and those that have wholeness and freedom. Now, the less shadow we have from doing shadow work, the more light we have in us, because we have to shine consciousness into the darkness of ourselves so we illuminate the darkness within ourselves. The more we do this, the more we realize that we have much more in common with other people than we ever realized. We all have sex urges. We all have the desire for some level of financial safety and security. But seeing rich people driving nice cars and saying, they're just a lucky bastard, they're probably a trust fund baby or something like that, creates the illusion of separation. And it basically casts a negative light on them. But when you can turn that over and say there's someone who's probably worked really hard and learned how to manage their finances well and make wise investments and is really committed to what they do and they're reaping the rewards of that, and I'm willing to work on being that way so I can enjoy those fruits of labor, then you have tamed it and you have less shadow and you have more freedom because you now are working on extracting your potential and managing the flow of energy and information in ways that does create more light and more freedom for you. Next, I'd like to talk about the pressure to become soul loss and the pain teacher. The pain teacher is always there to guide us toward our essence, our true nature. What that means is that, as I've alluded to earlier in the series, pain is the great quickener of consciousness. But when we come into the world, we're unconscious, and we're unconscious of the programming that we are taking on. The child's nervous system and even soul is wide open to every experience. Literally every single pin drop has an impact and is recorded deep within the psyche of that individual child. So the truth is that most of us keep banging into ourselves and in relationships with persons, places, and things because we are not aware that we are working on finishing the unfinished business of our parents' lives. So if you look carefully at what causes your parents' pain individually or collectively in relationship, it's a very good insight into the beliefs and behaviors that, though we may not consciously agree to or even think we enact, on closer evaluation, you're likely to find that when the pain teacher shows up, if you look carefully, you're running one of those programs that mom or dad or both of them installed in you when you had no defense against it. So the best thing we can do to evolve our genes is learn to work with the pain teacher and pay close attention, remembering that when things repeatedly show up in our lives and we're quite sure we didn't want them, it's an indication, as Arnold Patent says, to look carefully at what we're choosing unconsciously. Now, one of the things I'd like to help everybody understand about the soul is that the soul is a silent guide until you learn to speak to it, which requires that you learn to still your ego mind or your thinking mind and go down to your heart, lower your consciousness to your heart. One of the most important questions you can ask when in a challenge is, what would love do now? And that is the nature of the soul. The soul is really unconditional love, having an experience within polarity. But to help you understand the soul, it's best to think of the concept of the acorn. If you take an acorn to the most advanced scientific laboratory in the world with the highest power microscope, even one that can go down all the way to electrons, such as an electron scanning microscope, you will not see an oak tree in there. You won't see any image of an oak tree whatsoever. But what is in there is the DNA, and the DNA acts as an antenna that connects to the information fields that ultimately are housed within not only our individual soul, but in the souls of all who we are connected to, and all the souls who we are yet to be connected to, our soul contracts. And just as you can't rightly plant an orange seed and stand there when it's only a sapling, bitching at it because it's not growing fruit without just becoming very stressful to the little tree, if we're not conscious that we're pushing ourselves too hard or for the wrong reasons, then we can actually be like that little orange tree that feels all this self-generated or parentally generated or societally generated pressure to produce fruit. Here the fruit would be, what is your dream or your life's goal or your current dream, goal, or objective? And is that dream, goal, or objective coherent with your heart feelings? Is it truly taking you where you want to go, or are you trapped in an archetype like the victim, the saboteur, the prostitute, the eternal child, and so on? or you may be a rebel without a cause. So as we grow and work with the pain teacher and we give ourselves empathy and compassion, if we can see ourselves like that little orange tree or that acorn that needs to be nourished, just as a tree needs warmth, sunlight, water, and nourishing soil, solid, good, nutritious soil to grow and become and bear fruit, so do we. And tending to ourselves is one of the most challenging things for us to do, because we're in a culture where we have externalized our parents into all sorts of authority figures and various deities or God images, which comes from religious beliefs and programming, which is all part of the process. Remember, Jung says all religious systems are designed to protect you against the direct experience of God. Because God is unconditional love, if you enter that state of consciousness, you cease to exist as an individual. You will die. Your sense of self will be gone. The drop will return to the ocean to lose all its self-identity. So what I'm really sharing here is it's important to realize that the world is the way it is to generate polarity, which creates a matrix, kind of like a ladder that we can climb, or a lattice we can climb, like a runner plant. And as we learn to overcome the challenges of our parental programming, which begins when we become a teenager, and then we go out into the world and we find out where we're unconscious because we keep banging into people, places, and things and ourself, whether it be sex, drugs, money, music, dance, art, power, control, prestige. There's many, many lures out there. We will meet the pain teacher, which is Great Spirit's gift of guidance before we are too far down the line to realize who and what we really are. And as we grow through the matrix of consciousness and the structure stages of consciousness and the challenges that life inherently brings us, the pain teacher slowly guides us and gives us regular opportunities to look beyond our belief system, or look beyond the judgments that others may have, or look beyond anything that is other than an honest interest in what is love guiding me to do now or to learn now. And as we learn and grow with the support of the pain teacher, we inevitably realize that we need each other. We need family. We need friends. We need society. We need culture. We need the animals, the plants, the trees. We all need each other. And so as you grow spiritually, your awareness of the great chain of being begins to expand and expand until you come to the realization that the level of perfection behind it all is undeniable, and that any perceived pain or limitation is really only the force of spiritual guidance, guiding you to a deeper realization, a deeper healing, a deeper letting go, a deeper expansion, until all of a sudden you begin to have moments of complete self-realization. That's capital SELF realization, where you realize you are one in the all, yet all in the one. You are irreplaceable and a perfect piece of the whole, without which the whole, or God itself, cannot be whole. And so that makes things much more sustainable, because in the process we learn what love genuinely is, how to give it, and how to receive it, and how to meter it so that it comes in the right forms for the right people. Sex and violence lovers abuse empathetic and compassionate lovers. They need to be given conditions that move them towards harmony and balance. We will get into issues of love in a future podcast series, because I love love. When the pain teacher arrives in our life and the theme is one that is repeating itself, it is generally an indication that we are acting out of parental, social, or religious programming and not listening to our heart or soul, as I've alluded to here. So look carefully where you have repeat visits from the pain teacher. For example, what are the reasons given for you being fired from jobs? Write down everything you can remember about closing discussions with superiors that led to you not having a job, and then look for the pattern. You might see something like irresponsible, lack of timeliness, lack of commitment, lack of follow-through, inability to be a team player, and things like that. So as you look for the pattern, you can do some real, honest shadow work. And that's what shadow work is. The pain teacher shows up to show you where and how to illuminate your shadow. And through a genuine interest in loving yourself, life, others, and the world, as you heal the shadow, you learn to love simultaneously. And love is the light that illuminates all. Love is the light that penetrates all. There is no place love cannot enter. So we are generally in a process of learning to listen to our heart and our soul, remembering that only God can give a soul, because it is unconditional love within the conditions that produce this thing we call mind, which carries the condition we call the experience of emotion and feeling, which are inherently part of the experience called life, which is the product of love. So some of these things take time to meditate on, and that's one of the reasons I'm slowing my voice down a little bit, so the words can sink into you. And as I tell my students, don't believe a word I say. Dig into it for yourself. You got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So in my system, when we get to number 2, we're dealing with balance. So here, visits from the pain teacher will have something to do with a lack of balance between the feminine, yin, and masculine yang energies. Remember, these are the 2 qualities of unconditional love, or zero. The only way we can symbolize that which is unconditional is 0. Anything else represents a condition, and 0 only has 2 essential qualities. It's empty of everything. Yet because it has no border barrier or definition, it contains everything. So the emptiness of 0 is the feminine, receptive, anabolic, and the fullness of 0 is the masculine, expressive, catabolic. And it's catabolic because everything that is produced that can be labeled, named, or recognized is subject to the law of impermanence, which means it's transient. But the womb, the emptiness of 0, the vacuum, never ceases to keep producing more expressions of itself. But just remember that it's tricky if you start falling in love with expressions such as hanging too much dependence upon somebody else to make you happy in a relationship, or pleasure you sexually, or putting too much of your sense of self-worth into how much money you have, or the belongings you have, the clothes you wear, the car you drive, etc. Those things are all highly subject to impermanence, which brings the pain teacher on and opens the door to our soul. And our soul is there to guide us to what is ultimately eternal and unconditional, which is capital G, capital O, capital D. Not a religious God. Not a God that has rules or regulations. This God is pure, unadulterated life experience. It is pure, unadulterated movement. It is pure, unadulterated potential expressed in any way you choose to look at it. And that is well borne out in quantum physics, which I won't get into now because it would be a bit of a segue, and that might be a visit with the pain teacher for those of you that don't really have the background to follow those concepts. So the key areas we need to be aware of when the pain teacher arrives in our life are the 4 doctor categories of living, which are based on values, choices, and actions. The chief of the 4 doctors in my system is Dr. Happiness. And Dr. Happiness's domain is what is happy making, what is life and love sustaining that you can do or create for yourselves and share with others each day. Now, we have a huge problem with anxiety and depression and suicide right now. No surprise there. But amongst that is billions of dollars of drugs being sold and consumed. Ultimately, this has been going on for around 100 years or so, and it's only gotten us in worse condition. So you can't really rely on priests in white jackets with a stethoscope hanging off their neck. Not that they're not useful, but you have to be able to use careful discernment, or you can fall into a trap that leads to another trap, which gets deeper and deeper. There's a time and a place for everything, but it's up to us to decide. And the pain teacher shows up to show us when we're not paying attention or listening with our whole being, or being lazy in our own research. Now, it's very interesting that there are 5 questions commonly asked by real shaman when someone comes to them because they're having a health crisis or a spiritual challenge or a personal crisis of some time. Some of you have heard me mention them before. As I sing, as I can sing them to you, as I share these, please remember Jung's comment that all children are tasked with the unfinished business of their parents' lives. The first question a shaman is likely to ask you is, when did you stop singing? When did you stop singing because you were happy? Singing in the shower, singing in your car, singing while you're exercising, singing while you're working in the garden, singing while you're taking the garbage out, singing while you're changing diapers, singing whenever you can, because it creates harmony and beauty and does amazing things to your insides. There's the old saying, being happy may not make you sing, but singing makes you happy. And that's important to remember. And now, I've used these questions countless numbers of times in my professional work with people having all sorts of crisis challenges. And it is astounding how accurate the answers to these questions are for determining when the challenge that somebody suffers from actually started. So if you're depressed, ask yourself, when did you stop singing? If you're feeling stuck in life, ask when you stop singing. If you are stuck in a relationship, ask, when did we stop singing together? Remember, those that play together stay together. I test that regularly. It's working. So if the pain teacher shows up in your life, a simple solution is to take time to sing. Sing your sorrows, sing your tears, sing your joy, sing your dreams, sing your fears. If you do it honestly from your heart and ask Great Spirit for support, love, wisdom, and guidance, you will see that the pain teacher will have served you well, because you will have remembered how to find Great Spirit's songline and connect yourself to all those who get joy and healing from singing. The next question is, when did you stop dancing? Dancing is our natural, spontaneous state of expressing ourselves. If you ever spend time around children who are being loved, you will see they love to dance. My little boy Mana is an amazing dancer. His mama Penny has taught him a lot of cool dance moves and takes him to Zumba and all sorts of neat things. We took him to dance lessons and all sorts of neat things. But boy, when the music comes on, that kid gets rocking, man. He puts on a great show, and he inspires all of us to dance and sing. He loves to sing too. And his little sister Zoe is well on her way to joining him. She's only 2 months old, but she's already making beautiful sounds and wiggles beautifully to the music of life. So if you're in pain, the pain teacher may be inviting you to start dancing. If you're in a wheelchair, then dance with your arms and your head and your spine. If all you've got left is a little finger or an eyeball, just dance to the music with it and let that be the flow that leads you to embracing yourself and embracing life and embracing others in the movement of harmony. And you will see that you can dance yourself right back into health, especially if you sing as you dance. When did you stop enjoying stories? This is a very important question. Many of us stop enjoying stories when we told ourselves we had too much to do, or we became too serious about our accomplishments. Usually that begins academically, unfortunately. We get so busy trying to please our teachers and our parents that we make excuses as to why we don't have time to enjoy stories. And then the more educated you get, the more likely you are to say that these stories aren't even true or they're stupid and miss the whole point. So when you stop enjoying stories, you get caught in your own story, and the pain teacher often shows up to inspire you to listen to the stories of other people who have healed their pain, to listen to the great storytellers, because they're almost all teaching you how to avoid being in pain by being more aware of what you're creating each day. If you have children, then enjoying stories is critical. If you have a child inside of you that didn't get to enjoy stories often enough, then it is critical for you to parent that child within yourself through stories. And stories are fun to create, fun to make up, fun to act out as skits, fun to sing. Great songs are often great stories. So we really have a lot of freeway in there, a lot of leeway to really enjoy stories. And when you get right down to it, our life is our story. And without it, there's not much left but a bunch of biology pumping blood and fluids. And that's easy to see if you've been around anybody with Alzheimer's. They have forgotten their story, and they've forgotten the key players or actors in their story. And so they really are back down to sort of a storyless state of biological urge. And that boils down to move toward food and avoid pain in the moment, because there is nothing left for them but the moment. So when we lose our story, we've pretty much lost everything. And it's always recorded in the consciousness of the universe. It's never truly lost. It's just that we lose connection to our soul, which is the great storehouse of our story and is our great storyteller that tells much better stories than our ego does, but does like to use the ego to make stories exciting. So when the pain teacher shows up, listen carefully to the story you're telling yourself and telling others. And if it doesn't match, then there's an issue that can cause pain. If your story does not match the story you're telling others, you're likely to get fatigued, get sick, then you'll get a disease, and then you'll die. How long that takes depends on how out of balance, or how big, as Ken Wilber would say, how big your story gap is, the gap between the story you're telling yourselves and the story you're telling others. So when the pain teacher shows up, look carefully at the excuses that you're making about why you can't or have to do things. And remember, I can't is generally right there with I have to when it comes to taking care of ourselves, which are the words of a child that doesn't know any better. But I choose to, and I'm willing to, or I can, are the words of an adult. Now, that could be better said a spiritual adult, because it doesn't matter how old your body is, you could still be very much a spiritual child. The next question you're likely to get asked by a skilled shaman is, when did you stop enjoying being alone with yourself? And that is a very, very important question, because if we lose the ability to enjoy being alone with ourselves, we are highly likely to fall into the trap of codependent relationships on others, where we expect them to make us feel safe, make us happy, take care of us, which means we can become quite a drag for people. We're not carrying our weight when we live that way. When you stop enjoying being alone with yourself, then you never hear the voice of your soul. You're only externalized in your sense of self. And you become caught in identifying yourself with doing, not being. And doing in place of being leads to burnout, that's for sure. I spent the majority of the day today just relaxing in the sun. I lifted stones. I spent an hour lifting stones. I fasted today until this late afternoon when I'm recording this, and just let my body rest. But I just got to hang out with myself and just meditate and just enjoy the beauty of nature. And what a joy it is. One of my favorite things to do is just lay down and get quiet with myself and listen to the sound of my own heartbeat. Sometimes I'll touch my carotid artery so I can feel the pulse of my soul's drumbeat moving through me, and listen to it. And listen to it from my heart's ear to say, dear soul, if there's a message you're giving to me in this drumbeat, What is it? And then I just open myself from that place of emptiness and receptivity and see what rises. And it's often very inspiring. You know, if you don't know yourself, you can't know anybody else more than you can know yourself. Just like you can't love somebody else more than you can love yourself. And when we don't love ourselves, it's usually because we haven't spent time getting to know ourselves. We've spent too much time believing other people's judgments of us, which usually, unfortunately, begins with our parents. So one of the times that the pain teacher is most likely to show up for you, if you have stopped enjoying being alone with yourself, is going to be in relationship challenges where you become stressful to other people, and a pattern will start to emerge with why people leave you or don't want to be with you or don't respond to you. And then you'll eventually find that the pain teacher organizes things beautifully so you can be alone with yourself. The secret is not to wait until it's in a hospital bed or in a psych ward or in a drug rehab center or in a addiction program. There is no greater mystery in the world than yourself. And you can get no closer to God ever than you can by being one with yourself, because within what you are is the majesty and the mystery of Source, because it is what's sustaining you all the time. It is the heartbeat of unconditional love that produces everything that is. Finally, and probably not a surprise, the final question a shaman may ask you is, when did you lose your sense of the magic, mystery, and awe for life? And you'll know that the pain teacher has showed up for you if this is an issue, because one of the most common things you're going to say is, I'm bored, or this is boring, or life is boring, or you're boring, speaking to someone else. And the reality of it is that we usually start losing our sense of magic, mystery, and awe for life when we stop enjoying being alone with ourselves, because that is the door to the magic and the mystery of life itself. You can't get any closer to the magic. You are breathing the mystery, and it is the awe of life for life that created you. So one of the best ways to invite the pain teacher is to develop the I know mind. When you think that you know something because physicists or scientists or researchers have figured it out, you are on the edge of a visit from the pain teacher. When you think you have a better idea and you have a bigger concept that aids you in becoming a more open-minded learner that's willing to look at both sides of any situation or occasion, then you are learning in ways that restore the sense of magic, mystery, and awe for life. Because you find, as if I, that the deeper you go with your questions and the more answers you get, the more you realize you have a myriad more questions, and your questions get deeper and better, but they take more centering, more meditative awareness and focus and deep listening to get the answers to. And one of the reasons is that because the deeper questions cannot be answered through language. Language, by definition, divides things. It chops them up. CAT does not equal DOG. So when we want to get to the deeper mysteries, we have to empty ourselves and let go of our rational thinking mind and be brave enough to enter the unrational, which is scary for people because the deeper you go into it, the more you realize you have no control. And then if you go deep enough, you'll realize you never really were in control of anything that really mattered that much. Great Spirit just lets us have a little rope to swing on and a little bit of steering wheel to play with. But the course of our life and the course of our unfolding is guided by a level of magic and mystery and awe that cannot be comprehended by the rational linguistic mind. It can be captured by poetry. It can be captured in art. It can be captured in the essence, the vibration, the healing brought by song. It can be captured by the deeper meaning of story. It can be captured, as I've said, by going deeply into yourself with the question, who am I? And what am I? So if the pain teacher is showing up in your life and you're feeling like it's mundane or you think you've got it all figured out, it's most likely because you have fallen in love with ideas and beliefs. And remember, the intellect is a map of other people's ideas largely. But the map is never the territory. So you can rest assured that when your map does not match the territory and you're not paying attention to the difference between the two, the pain teacher will show up to inspire you to wake up. So hopefully, learning the 5 questions of a shaman are very, very helpful for you. I have found them beautiful in my life, and I ask them of myself regularly. Well, now that we've discussed balance and the perspective of the questions that a shaman is likely to ask you and explored those key questions, I'd like to move on to number 2 in the 1, 2, 3, 4 formula, which is balance, and look at balance from the perspective of the 4 doctors in regard to how the pain teacher is likely to show up. And remember, as we're talking about things like this, it is generally, well, quite simply put, where there's excess, the medicine is less. Where there's deficiency, the medicine is more. So let's look at the 4 doctors from the perspective of balance, because the pain teacher really shows up most often when we are out of balance, whether that be physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. Now, if you should happen to hear the sound of chimes in the background, it may be that there's angels coming to visit you, or you could be hearing the sound of the beautiful chimes hanging in my garden that Beverly Smiles gave to me for my birthday. And I just love them so much. I just figured if they made it into the recording, you get to enjoy some of the beauty that I'm enjoying. So should you enjoy the angels or the chimes, let's enjoy them together. Now, movement, as most of you know, is a big issue in our lives, and an important one too, which is why it is one of the 4 doctors. In my system, each of the 4 doctors is related to movement of the body or physical movement, related to the emotions, which could be movement of emotions in this regard, related to the mind, and related to, that's Dr. Happiness, and related to diet. So diet, quiet, movement, and happiness are all expressed at the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual levels. I typically only present them at the physical levels in my lower levels of training, and I've kept it mostly to the basics here because it can get quite deep. So So as I'm discussing balance in the 4-doctor concept, once you understand the concept itself, you can apply it to your emotional life, your mental life, and your spiritual life as well. Now, when our body hurts, we can listen to it and be guided by the pain teacher. Some of the common ways that we create pain for ourselves by being unconscious or rebellious or drugged or confused are excess yin or lack of movement. Now, yin means to draw energy and resources in or to multiply power. So somebody that, for example, eats too much and rests too much typically becomes overweight and then obese, which means they have stored a lot of energy and resources, providing that the food is nutritious. But at the same time, lack of movement leads to tremendous stagnation because it does not pump our body and stimulate our body and our metabolism, nor does it inspire growth. And the body operates on the MENS principle, and it operates on the least energy theory, minimal electrical neuromuscular stimulation. And least energy theory means the body won't spend energy to do something it doesn't have to do. In other words, your body won't work out for you without your participation. So if we're not getting enough movement to meet our biological needs, then we will have issues of stagnation and excess accumulation, and we get very unfit, and we can get to the point where we are too weak to even deal with the forces of gravity. And I've seen people that were so deconditioned that they could not even walk up one flight of stairs. In fact, I've seen professional bodybuilders that are using massive amounts of steroids who got winded just walking up 5 or 6 stairs into Gold's Gym where I used to train. So interestingly enough, they had a lack of cardiovascular fitness, but not a lack of strength. So again, we need to look at what does our body need, not just what are we doing. Excess yang, remember yang means division of power, and the utilization of resources simply leads to burnout. So if we're doing too much of any one activity, we can burn out. We can develop an injury. We can have all sorts of inflammatory responses. But we may be doing too much weightlifting and not enough cardiovascular conditioning, following through with my last example. So we may burn out one form of movement or one approach to movement, but we may actually be deficient in another. And the thing we always have to consider is what are our basic physiological needs first? In other words, what does it take just to be healthy? And second, we've got to consider the specific needs of our dream, goal, or objective. We must remember that movement should nourish and develop or grow the body and shouldn't be a source of emotional or mental distress. It should be a source of what is called eustress or useful stress. So your pain teacher is going to visit you if, for any reason, your form of movement is leading to physical, emotional, or mental distress, such as fretting over how hard the training program is, or telling yourself you're tired, but having the distress of feeling like you've got to drag yourself to the gym anyhow, which is not unusual on teams where you have a wide variety of people following the same workout plans, but there could be a drastic difference in the level of readiness amongst any one of the athletes on any given day. And so if you were to be in a situation like that, it would be your responsibility to talk to whoever you've got to talk to explain your level of readiness relative to what's being asked of you. And you may meet some resistance, is often the case with coaches. But ultimately, you either meet the resistance of standing your ground and being true to yourself, or you cave in and meet the resistance of an injury or bringing on an illness. It's part of our adult responsibility to make choices like that, and the pain teacher doesn't play favorites. In other words, the pain teacher will show up to guide you regardless of the choice you're making if it's not the ideal choice. Now, with exercise, as with so many things, it's important to remember that the map is never the territory. Your workout is an idea. It is not the actual experience of doing the conditioning or the training, and should be modified as needed, or the pain teacher will come bring you into a more intimate relationship with your body, your emotions, and your mind. And we're in a very mental culture, and many strength coaches and trainers and people like that I've met, which is thousands of them, are very, very confused with regard to the issue of map and territory. And so many people that I've rehabilitated, from bodybuilders to elite athletes to amateur athletes to weekend warriors, have injured themselves because they worshipped an idea and ignored the experience they were having by following the idea, such as, I have to run 60 miles a week, or I've got to get this many hours of swimming in, or I've got to get this many hours of weightlifting in, or I have to move this much pounds per workout. And the list goes very, very long. Pattern overload is a common problem, and I've lectured on this all over the world, and I wrote my book, Movement That Matters, where I talk about this. But if we get stuck in too narrow a selection of movement patterns, then we can end up having problems because we're overloading those tissues relative to our capacity to recover. So if the pain teacher shows up because you're squatting too much, or lunging too much, or using dumbbells or kettlebells or any given pattern of movement too much, it's usually an invitation to be more creative. There are 7 primal movement patterns that I teach: squatting, lunging, bending, pushing, pulling, twisting, and gait. Gait has 3 derivations: walking, jogging, and sprinting. But the combination of those patterns is incredibly high. Throwing a ball, for example, is a 3-pattern movement: a lunge, a twist, and a push. But if you look at all the activities that we do, there is many, many things that we can do. And there's other patterns that are not primal patterns. Primal patterns are primal patterns because they're done on your feet without support. So you've got things that are done horizontally. You've got things that are done on machines. You've got activities like swimming. There's a lot of things. Figure skating, it includes some primal patterns, but it includes movements such as jumping and spinning movements that you could break down into primal patterns but weren't necessary for survival in the wild. So sometimes what we've got to do, as an example, is we've got to get off the land and run in a swimming pool to decompress ourselves. We used to have a lot of problems with boxers having hand and wrist problems on the boxing team and overtraining problems. So one of the things I implemented when I became the trainer was shadow boxing in neck-deep water and just going to the pool and playing around in a swimming pool because of its ability to decompress the joints, improve circulation, and because we have so many sensory neurons in our skin, as the movement passes, the water moves over the skin and stimulates the hair, it triggers proprioceptive inputs that ultimately inhibit pain perception, which shut down the pain spasm cycle. So there's an example of how, through exposure to the pain teacher as a trainer, I realized I had to induce a different form of movement that still allowed them to do boxing-specific training, but in a very decompressed environment that supported rapid recovery, and it worked beautifully well. So there's just a simple example I share of how to work with the pain teacher. The pain teacher often comes to inspire us to have deeper awareness of such issues as the integration and function of our core. The core, again, is your pelvic floor, your abdominal wall, your deep spinal stabilizers such as multifidus muscles, and your diaphragm. There's other muscles, but those are the key ones. And so if we are doing too much dynamic movement, for example, people going to CrossFit or kettlebell programs, or doing strongman type lifts, or only doing heavy lifts that, or pretty much any kind of sporting activity that don't do any specific conditioning to enhance the strength and functionality and endurance of our core systems and our stabilizer systems, as well as looking at the issues of static and dynamic postural function, the pain teacher will show up. I'll give you an example. I once had a strongman come to see me. He was a Christian strongman. He was a friend of Chuck Norris's, and I was working with Chuck Norris at the time. This guy could tear the LA phone book in half and roll metal frying pans and do all sorts of crazy stuff. But he would get low back pain within about 1 to 2 minutes of doing activities like brushing his teeth, where he was just leaning forward over a sink. Now, this guy could probably deadlift 900 or 1,000 pounds. So when I did a test on him called the Sorensen test, which requires that you lay horizontally on a bench or like a back extension bench with your hip at the axis point, and you have to keep your trunk parallel or slightly above the floor, so you're laying horizontal, but your trunk's not supported, only your thighs are. And that Sorensen test shows that if you have normal postural endurance, you can hold that position for 4 minutes without dropping below horizontal. He lasted 18 seconds. So here's an example of someone whose static postural stability and core stabilizer function was so radically off compared to his prime movers that it was creating chronic back pain, and the heavier the load he would lift with such a core weakness, the more compression, torsion, and shear he got on joints, and ultimately led to problems with discs and nerve roots and things like that. Now, these may be, for some of you, technical concepts, but remember, the pain teacher is there to guide you in creating the awareness of who to go to for help. And that's an important part of our growth and development, and the pain teacher often initiates new and meaningful relationships that can also have a tremendous positive impact on other areas of our life. Many of my patients over the years have become great friends. Many of my patients ended up leaving their careers to become Chek professionals because they were so profoundly moved by what they learned through therapy with me that they wanted to be able to share that level of freedom with other people. Next is the need for work-in practices to balance work-outs. Working in supports the essential need of our inner awareness and development that sheds light on issues such as our shadow, beliefs that are not serving us, judgments and pain from the past that needs healing, and ultimately issues that people commonly use exercise as a means of distracting them from. So many people have exercise as an addiction, with either consciously or unconsciously, mostly unconsciously, not realizing that they are avoiding issues of relationships and responsibilities and things like that by drowning themselves with exercise to sort of numb them from the potential awareness of their contribution to the challenges in their life. So if our exercise is stopping us from growing personally, professionally, and spiritually, you can rest assured the pain teacher will visit you. And right then and there, as I was just saying, you're probably going to end up spending more time in relationships, except it's probably going to be with doctors and therapists, which is a good start. Then you just got to make sure you're the right type of patient to learn, or that just becomes another level of shadow, and you can soon find yourself with a list of 10 or 15 doctors and therapists that you tell everybody was no good, not realizing they've helped countless numbers of people with the same challenges. The difference is those people participated. Next, we have the need for rotational and frontal plane movements, not just sagittal plane movements. Most gym exercise equipment and most gym exercises are front to back. So when you're doing a squat, you're moving in the sagittal plane, front to back. A deadlift, sagittal plane. Biceps curl, sagittal plane. If you're on machines, knee extensions, hamstring curls, calf raises, abdominal flexion machines, back extension machines, triceps press downs. Those are all movements in the sagittal plane, front to back. But rotation is the catalyst movement for all movements in our body, and all joints in our body are called triplanar, which means even when you're doing a biceps curl, there's actually movement in the frontal and transverse plane, so side to side and rotational movement in our elbow joints, for example. So if we get caught in too much sagittal plane movement, one, we're very susceptible to injury when we are loaded in the frontal plane, left to right, such as when you're carrying a suitcase. It's on one side of your body. It's trying to pull you to the side that the suitcase is on. So the muscles on the opposite side of your body have a frontal plane load on them. And if we are too weak, you're going to get hurt doing that. And when I owned a physical therapy clinic and worked in physical therapy and chiropractic clinics, many was the number of people that hurt their backs going on vacation, carrying suitcases from cars to airports and things like that. Many nurses have these types of problems, and I've rehabilitated a lot of them that got injured transferring people from one gurney to the next, which requires that they lift and rotate, and there is some side bending movement in that. So it's very important for us to make sure that we use movements that induce rotation and side bending movements. And that's one of the reasons I love the Swiss ball so much, because it allows you to move in all those planes depending on the way you organize the exercise or what type of exercise you're doing. But it's very, very good at inducing rotation and frontal plane movements in concert with sagittal plane movements to give us a more holistic conditioning. And because the Swiss ball is unstable, it keeps your stabilizer system quite turned on, which is the opposite, for example, of being on the floor or a machine. And again, the more stabilized you are by a machine or the floor, the less your nervous system will activate its own stabilizers. So the result is you develop lots of strength, but you don't co-develop the stabilizers and neutralizers that work in concert with those muscles when doing functional movements. A good example is lots of people use Smith machines and they can squat lots of weight on them. But having tested many of them, they usually can't squat but half of that with a free bar relative to what they can do on a Smith machine. And the same is true of leg presses, for example. Next is the ego. The pain teacher makes regular visits to those whose ego is seeking identification and validation via external physical accomplishments, such as sports, CrossFit, kettlebell competitions, etc. Anywhere where the ego is bolstering its sense of self-identity beyond the point of it being healthy, we're likely to become so hungry for success or addicted to success that we don't realize we're throwing our body and mind out of balance. And then what happens is we can fall into the trap of an illusion of I above and beyond we are all. For example, no one is strong or fast enough to do anything meaningful in the world alone. As I tell my students, who cares if you can flip cars or squat 1,000 pounds if you can't get along with your wife, kids, lover or lovers, friends, and coworkers? And I know this very well from my own visits with the pain teacher. Some of you may have listened to my Evolve Yourself podcast series, but when I was in my about 36, maybe 36 or 37, I was very strong and did a lot of training and was very committed to proving the Chek approach by going to sports teams and demonstrating that I could pretty much outlift most of the people on the team. Every now and then there was someone that could outlift me in one or two lifts, but for the most part, I could outlift almost everybody on any of the sports teams I worked with, regardless of the type of team. But it also led me into not realizing that I was using too much power and force in my relationships and being too physical in the way I handled things. And because I was admittedly slow to come to that realization, the result was the pain teacher showed up one day when I showed up in, I think it was England, late at night, and was just walking into the hotel from a long international flight, and some young guys asked me to lift them up, put them over their head, and my inner voice said not to do it, you're too tired, but my ego said, oh, let them have the fun. Long story made short, one guy got scared, buckled, fell through my hands right onto my head, blew my C5 and C6 discs out, tore ligaments in my spine, pinched my spinal cord. And within 4 weeks, I'd lost 26 pounds of muscle, and the whole left side of my body went numb and began to atrophy, and I couldn't even carry a briefcase for a couple of months. And I was very seriously pushed back into myself and had to go through a crisis of self-identity because I felt very insecure without all my strength. Even though I'm a skilled boxer and martial artist, pretty much a little girl could have put me in a headlock and possibly broke my neck. So all of a sudden, I was having to have Penny carry everything for me, which was embarrassing in airports and things like that in hotels. And I had to face my own insecurities about being around powerful men or any such thing, where I just felt like I just didn't have any physical ability because literally at any moment my head might snap right off. And it took me 8 years to rehabilitate myself, and I had to go through quite a deep inner crisis and healing, and it brought me very deep into connection with my soul. And interestingly enough, within a couple of years, people started coming to me after my lectures and going, I don't know what it is, but you're so much more approachable since you've lost all that muscle and strength. I feel safer around you, and comments like that I had no idea before that I was scaring people or that I was so aggressive that it was decreasing a person's capacity to listen to me, follow me, and learn from me, not increasing it. So there's an example of when the ego gets too inflated, how the pain teacher can show up to deflate us and bring us into touch with the importance of relationships with other people and growing with people, not just domineering them with power and force and things like that. Also, we have to remember that nutrition is a common key contributor to physical pain, even when you might think it's just your exercise program or that you hurt yourself bending over to get something under a sink, and therefore when a physical therapist says, oh, it's just the way you bent your body, it could be, for example, that you're eating poor quality food and your ligaments are weak and your disc tissues, your connective tissues are weak. As I often say, you can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. And if you look at Lady Eve Balfour's book, The Living Soil and the Holly Experiment, she talks directly about nutrition and its effects on joints and ligaments, and cites a private school in Auckland, New Zealand that switched to organic food and actually started their own garden. And the team physician noticed that within a year, the number of injuries to joints, ligaments, and tendons had radically dropped. But the only thing that had changed was the food. And so, without a long nutrition discussion, just know that oftentimes what seems like injuries related to our movement are actually a byproduct from poor nutrition and eating practices, which we'll get into shortly under the heading of Dr. Diet. There are other key factors the pain teacher may be teaching you to look into as well, which could be food allergy, food intolerance, nutritional deficiency, such as just not having a wide enough variety to meet your body's needs. And then beyond that is lack of rest and the need to invest more time in study, personal growth, business development, etc., not just exercise. And I've met a lot of people that are trapped in the exercise treadmill, metaphorically, identifying themselves through exercise. And then we have soul contracts. If the way we engage exercise is distracting us from our ability to fulfill soul contracts with those in our personal, professional, or spiritual lives, then the pain teacher will show up to adjust your heart compass. In other words, to the degree that exercise isn't the best way to grow ourselves because it's stopping us from engaging growth in other important areas of our life, we are very likely to get a visit from the pain teacher, and that is probably going to inspire more time and more listening to other people. For example, when I hurt myself really bad, I found myself more willing to listen to other people's opinions instead of just being forceful with my own, because behind being forceful with my own opinions was the belief that I was strong enough and skilled enough to handle myself no matter who got pissed off at me. Therefore, I wasn't afraid to be forceful with opinions, even if the person I was in a dialogue or discussion or an argument with was some big brute of a dude, because I've handled many big brutes of a dude before, and skill always outweighs size and strength. Even if you study martial arts and jiu-jitsu and things like that, you'll see little guys that can just tie big guys in knots, and I've seen plenty of that. But I had to grow past all that, and the pain teacher was my teacher. And I'm sure some of you listening have also had that very experience. Okay, next I'd like to talk about Dr. Diet and issues that bring the pain teacher to visit us. Most of you that follow my teachings, my podcasts, etc., have probably heard me talk a fair bit about these issues. And it's not my intention, nor do I have the ability here in one section of a podcast on the pain teacher to really do this justice. So if you haven't studied my primal pattern eating online training, highly recommend that you do that. It'll teach you a lot of ways to avoid the pain teacher and grow spiritually through eating, which we will talk about as well. But there are some key things that we all need to be aware of, and the first of them is food quality. There is no such thing as saving money on food. It's just a bad concept. And it stems from the idea that food is simply energy, which is a concept put forth in nutrition circles and comes from the idea that a calorie is a measure of energy, and basically food is nothing but calories and those kinds of things, which leads to the use of calorie counters and other things such as trying to save money on food, shopping at like big discount stores where you're getting a lot of commercial garbage. But in a nutshell, we have to remember that no vitamin can be produced in a laboratory the way it's produced by nature. Royal Lee identified in the late 40s and early 50s that vitamins come in complexes, and the complex includes fats, proteins, carbohydrates, enzymes, minerals, trace minerals, cofactors such as phenolics, terpenes, and alkaloids, and potentially a number of other factors that produce a harmony, a harmonious resonance. Remember, food is also energy and information. So it's not just calories, i.e. straight energy or work potential, but it's the information. And food carries information that if we're eating what we're designed to eat by our genetics is critical to regulating key systems. So certainly you've had the experience of drinking coffee and found that it upregulates your sympathetic nervous system, or eating a fatty meal and finding that it has a calming effect on you. Some of you know that aloe vera is good for healing wounds. So you see, it's not just the physical components of the aloe vera, i.e. the chemicals in it, but it's the information that it carries. And this is an area that's only now beginning to be explored. But at the basis of what I'm saying here is we must remember we're replacing all the cells in our body on a yearly basis, and those cells can't be any better than the food we eat in quality. Think of what I was referring to earlier with the health of ligaments and connective tissues, and I quoted Lady Eve Balfour's book, The Living Soil and the Holly Experiment, and what they found at a private school in Auckland, New Zealand, with the rugby players. And I've seen this countless times. In fact, I've been in surgery many times with surgeons who are operating on athletes, and they might be cutting through a ligament or a joint capsule to do their surgical procedure, and they've commented, wow, this guy or girl has super tough, super thick ligaments. In fact, I remember I was once in surgery with the San Diego Chargers doctor who was operating on one of my patients that I had referred to him that needed surgery. And he said this person's ligaments were so tough that he actually had to switch blades on his scalpel because he couldn't cut through the ligaments effectively without a brand new blade. And he was blown away at how tough this person's ligaments were. But at the same time, I've been in surgery. I remember one time I was in surgery with a client that had tendinosis of the Achilles, which is a degenerative change of the Achilles. And the tendon on that person was just like mush. And this was not a very healthy person. And it had a lot of necrotic, dead, nasty, stinky tissue where the tendon was about to break. But at the same time, we were having a conversation about the general health of this person because their tendon was just mushy. And so surgeons are aware, most of them, if they're wise, about the connection between food quality and the health of the tissues that we produce from the resources that we consume. So if your food's not organic, you can rest assured that it's toxic. And to the degree that it's not organic, it means the soil microorganisms are out of balance. And that is a big issue because the soil microorganisms and the fungi in the soil actually produce the grand majority of the nutrition that is fed to the plant. If you haven't watched my series or program called Nutrition, the Dirt Facts, it gets into this a fair bit, and it's available on DVD through the Chek Institute. I have it on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Paul Chek Live, Nutrition, the Dirt Facts. And you can learn a lot about that. And these are the kinds of things we get into in Holistic Lifestyle Coach training in more detail. But in a nutshell, anytime the pain teacher shows up, whether it be physical, emotional, or mental pain, food quality is an issue. And I'll give you an example. I have had now probably 15 or 20 cases of people consulting me because they were in states of not only depression, but having a lot of suicidal thoughts, anxiety attacks, obsessive compulsive behaviors, and a variety of such diagnoses. And one of the first things I ask them about is their diet. And in every case, they've been eating a standard diet full of garbage and candy and soda pop and, you know, the kind of the typical standard American diet, which stands for SAD, Standard American Diet, SAD crap, carbohydrates, refined foods, additives, and preservatives. And when they switch to an organic diet, usually within as little as 4 days and up to 2 weeks, they began noticing their mind was calming, that they weren't having such dark thoughts, etc. And they often ask me why, and I say, well, when you eat the flesh of an animal, you're eating the hormones that were produced in that animal at the moment of death. And then we could get into the psychic factors. The psyche is tied to the cells of the body of the animal. So when we eat an animal that was killed in inhumane ways and raised in inhumane ways, we actually take on the psychic energy of that animal. But most of us don't realize that that's working through us because we aren't typically developed enough to differentiate the psychic energies of an external source, such as the food we're eating or somebody else, and our own, and get confused thinking that it's our own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, when oftentimes it comes into us from the outside as food in this case. So even if the people that say organics know better than commercial for nutrition, which is completely false, it would be a lot cleaner food. And even if they say there's spillover of radiation and stuff that comes in the rain, the way the soils are farmed in organic and biodynamic farms is so radically different and so much better than commercial farming of any type that on a scale of what's available anytime you're going to real organic food, you're always going to be far less likely to end up with visits from the pain teacher. And one of the ways the pain teacher comes to visit is when your body is toxic. And if you look, for example, at the Chinese 5-element theory or the Chinese approach to medicine, you see each of our organs is the home of different emotions, and the liver, which is our chief organ of detoxification, is the home of anger. So I've seen many, many cases of people with problems managing anger that cleared up once we got their diet cleaned out their small intestine and colon, and then did a liver cleanse. Because when the liver's under stress or is toxic, the emotional byproduct of that energy is anger. And so there's a simple example. Next, we have to remember that each of us has unique individual needs, and there's no such thing as a diet it's right for 2 people. It's just not true. And I get into that with Matt Walden in our Honest Vegetarian series quite deeply. But we all have unique needs that can vary depending on the type of physical, emotional, or mental stress we're under, from the need for high carbohydrate or high energy, more concentrated carbohydrate foods to high fat, high protein foods. And there's many, many aspects of individuality and ways to deal with that effectively that we teach in our Holistic Lifestyle Coach program through the Chek Institute, which you can start easily online with Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1, which teaches you a lot, not to mention what's in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. So if we're not being conscious of what we need for food quantity, which also includes proportions of different macronutrients, such as plant foods versus animal foods, or below ground versus above ground vegetables, or above ground vegetables versus fruits and things like that, well, we can have all sorts of problems. And for people that are overeating any food, be it plant food, animal food, or otherwise, you open the door wide to parasite infections, and those overeating carbohydrates, be they refined or otherwise, relative to their body's needs, are highly susceptible to fungal infections. And fungal infections are very dangerous because research shows that funguses release chemicals, including mycotoxins, that downregulate cytokines and leukotrienes and other immune messengers, that then open the door wide for parasite infections, because when the immune system's disabled, the parasites are pretty free to run wild, and all the while the funguses are eating into you and causing biochemical changes that can lead to a lot of mental, emotional distress, and I can assure you that it does. Next, we got to be conscious of meal frequency. Now, typically, most of us need 3 meals a day. That's sort of just a general rule of thumb, but it's not written in stone. I tell people when you're hungry, eat, and when you're not hungry, don't eat. But there are issues involved in there, because if you think you're not hungry, but you've been sitting working at a computer for 5 or 6 hours, and you don't realize you're in a trance state, you may have trained yourself to ignore the signals or repress the signals from your body, which will lead to blood sugar handling problems, which will lead to emotional problems, which can lead to hormonal stress, which can lead to body weight problems, which can lead to all sorts of things, from inflammatory issues to toxicity issues. For example, if you're producing too much cortisol, your body has to detoxify your own cortisol, which makes it toxic to your body. So these are very, very real things that invite the pain teacher. And because food touches every aspect of our being, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, the pain teacher can show up A, in any one of those areas, but B, in multiple areas at one time. The next one is isms. And there's a lot of isms around food. Some of you are familiar with veganism or vegetarianism or fruitarianism or carnivorism. So isms are really sort of belief systems, but belief systems are typically closed, meaning they don't make room for information from outside the belief system. Vegetarians are very closed to the ideas of eating meat, for example. So are most vegans. Fruitarians are closed to the idea of eating anything other than fruit. You got all sorts of isms. Rastafarianism is also a vegetarian religion, and all religions, with rare exceptions, are closed to the ideas of other religions for various reasons. But one, if they're too open, then it's hard to distinguish what the practices and beliefs are. So there is a function for belief systems, but there's also a danger in them because they are closed. And if you're not mature enough to pay attention to what's happening physically, emotionally, and mentally to you, then the ism that helped you heal and feel better could end up being the source of a lot of fatigue, illness, injury, and disease if you're not careful. And so there you see the pain teacher comes to open up your belief system. And it's amazing, having worked with so many of these people, how resistant they actually are to outside information, even from people they're paying like me with a high level of expertise. And as I've said in many of my previous discussions, they will sit and argue with me for hours on end, not realizing it's costing them a lot of money. And as I say, if your ideas were as good as you say they are, then you wouldn't be sitting here asking for my help. But the real issue here is an ism, and isms often occur or are participated in when a person has not got a healthy mythology to guide their life. So they have to reach out for some sort of guiding structure. Isms are often participated in when people have not grown healthy individuality and often have had challenging relationships with their parents and are in need of an external authority figure, and most isms have authority figures leading them. Now, as I teach in my Primal Pattern eating program, eating is a practice that should be spiritualized, which means we should be honoring and worshiping and respecting nature and life and connecting to it and giving thanks or grace for it, and being conscious that something has given its life to sustain our life, and being aware that we can reciprocate by devoting our life to making life better for other living beings, or ideally all living beings, by fully participating as a conscious participant in life, not just somebody acting out an ism or a belief system, or acting unconsciously because that type of behavior is what's led us to a lot of the environmental trouble that we're in many ways, is just being unconscious of what we're really buying into without looking at the ramifications of it. When we become disrespectful and consume unconsciously, well, we're very likely to take more life from the earth than we're returning, and that invites the pain teacher. So you see that now with the destruction of topsoils worldwide and the destruction of the oceans through toxicity and chemicals and the destruction of the rainforests. All of this is based back on making money, but not really being conscious that by taking life from life and not putting life back in, but just toxins back in or waste back in, we're inviting the pain teacher personally and collectively, and we're also inflicting huge pain to the myriad of beings in nature that support us. So the pain teacher can show up in some pretty wild ways, including cyclones and monsoons and earthquakes and volcanoes and lightning strikes and every other thing you can imagine has been discussed with regard to the overall effects that we're having on the planet. And there's just too much evidence that we, by being unconscious of what we're consuming, not only as food, but as resources, and how we're doing it, is throwing the world out of balance. So if we're not careful, there won't be any place we can grow healthy food because we'll have poisoned the entire planet. Next, we have to look at issues of excess and deficiency. The number of diseases caused by excess is huge. That's easy to track. The number caused by deficiency is also significant. Some simple examples would be anorexia and bulimia, or just being underfed and undernourished, such as a lot of vegetarians and vegans are without realizing it, that their body doesn't have the bioavailable protein sources required by their genes in order to have enough anabolic power to respond to exercise and stress effectively. So you get very skinny people whose cheeks are sucked in. They often have high adrenaline levels because they're having to catabolize their own flesh through gluconeogenesis to bring their blood sugar up. And it leads to a lot of knock-on problems such as adrenal burnout and fragile emotions and mental turmoil. And those are visits from the pain teacher. And it's important to realize that the pain teacher will not leave us until we've learned the lessons that we need to learn to live true to our hearts. And our heart is metaphorically the home of the soul, and it's where we have the ability to be consciously aware of our connection to all persons, places, or things. So next, we want to talk here about Dr. Quiet and the pain teacher, and that's a huge, huge source of pain for our culture, is not understanding the principles and practices and science of rest. So I've broken them down to physical rest, emotional rest, mental rest, and then spiritual rest, or what I call rest from the spirit gym. If we're getting too much or too little physical rest, well, I think it's pretty obvious. If you're over-resting, then your body's going to start to break down and decondition, and you're not growing and participating. If you're getting too little rest, well, quite simply, you'll burn out at many levels. And the number of industrial accidents and automotive accidents and airline accidents that have been tracked down to sleep deficiency is significant. And the cost on an annual basis to sleep deprivation to society is in the multiple billions of dollars. So the pain teacher may not only show up, but it may get you killed. Skillful means of resting or distracting yourself with constant externalization of the self is a real issue. So what I'm saying here is we either use skillful means of rest, or we may be distracting ourselves by constantly engaging in other things such as video games, phones, email, texting, television, sports on television, having to always be doing something, going somewhere, talking to somebody, fidgeting, being distracted. And those people typically have a hard time with the idea or techniques of meditation. And this all relates to what I refer to as externalization of the self. Their sense of self is something they can't connect with unless it's engaged in an external activity. Whereas being within oneself, such as when you're meditating or just being alone in a bathtub quietly, that would be internalization of the self, coming within, where self-reflection can take place or intuition can happen, or just feeling your own feelings, feeling your own thoughts and judgments and emotions. So if we lose that internal connection to ourself by externalizing ourself, well, it often leads to us burning ourselves out physically and burning ourselves out in relationships because we don't realize that we're avoiding the necessary time to be with ourselves, get to know ourselves, and rest. And I've met many people and have had a number of patients over the years that say they cannot sleep unless the television or the radio is going. And so I could give you a long list of reasons that happens, but that's an example of externalizing the self, and it leads to poor quality sleep. It often leads to disrupted sleep for bed partners, be they children or intimate partners, or even people sleeping in the next bedroom. Then we have to look at emotional rest. And when we're talking about emotional rest, sometimes we need emotional rest from people that are stressful to us. And the pain teacher may be telling us we need to love people that are challenging for us from a distance. In other words, send your love to them through prayer or intention, but avoid meeting them and doing things with them when you see there's a pattern that they are either sucking your energy, abusing your time, or constantly wanting you to solve their life problems or begging for money all the time. So we can easily get burnt out and become emotionally exhausted from such people. We can have emotional stress from places. For example, if people work too much and they don't spend enough time in nature or at home, then they can start having negative associations with places like where they work. Or if a person is living in a house where there was a lot of physical, emotional, or mental trauma, it may be emotionally draining for them to be there. If we're an addict in recovery, but we're with people that keep the substances that we are having challenges with in the environment, then we may find being in a house like that or a building where there's too much exposure very emotionally stressful. And then we also have things, and things can be phones, things can be cars, things can be toys like video games, things can be televisions, things can be exercise equipment, things can be vibrators and related to sex addiction. So things are anything that's not a person or a place, and there's lots of them that lead to either addiction or emotional burnout and bring the pain teacher to us. So if we pay attention to what we're doing most often and how that correlates to our pain when the pain teacher's in us, then we're more likely to recognize which persons, places, or things are associated with the challenging emotions that we would associate with the presence of the pain teacher. Next, we need mental rest. We need to realize that the brain is a massive consumer of our energy. I read several years ago when I was doing some studies for various projects that the brain used 80% of the available blood sugar anytime it was cognitively engaged. Now, I have heard different figures, but the point is all the research shows that the brain is an absolute consumer of energy, and the brain runs on sugar, to put it simply. So if we're working our brain too hard with school, with constantly obsessing over what's wrong, why did mom do that? Why did dad do that? Why did so-and-so do this? How come they got promoted and I didn't? And all this kind of stuff. We can not only burn ourselves out, but we can find ourselves eating way more simple, quick energy foods than is ideal for us, not realizing that we're actually trying to fuel a brain or a mind, which is in the brain, gone wild as a bad habit. So when the pain teacher shows up because we're mentally exhausted, we run into issues of poor job performance. We often have challenges with forgetting things, even things that are important, which goes hand in hand with high cortisol levels. Whenever cortisol levels go high, short-term memory is compromised. That's one of the key initial indicators of adrenal exhaustion. People can't remember the paragraph they just read and have to read it 2 or 3 times and still have a hard time remembering. They can't remember passcodes, phone numbers, access codes that they've used over and over again. So we see the pain teacher shows up to show us that we need mental rest. And if we don't learn to flip the coin, and instead of focusing on what's wrong, and focus not only on what's right, but on our potential to create ways of balancing ourselves or looking for the beauty in a contradictory opinion so we can think holistically, then we simply burn ourselves out, and the pain teacher shows up as headaches, confusion, poor productivity, getting fired from jobs, short temper with people and children, and a very, very long list of ways that the pain teacher comes to show you the products of your own creation, which is usually unconscious creation. Next, we want to look at rest from what I call Spirit Gym. Spirit Gym is basically anything that will grow us physically, emotionally, or mentally, but I'm using this in the context of relationships. Some of us have people that we may love or we may have a great sexual relationship with, but we find the other 23 hours a day with them quite challenging, and can find ourselves going from, having this wild, passionate puppy love experience or even romantic love experience, and then all of a sudden our attachment syndromes start showing their colors, and we start projecting all our fears and all our pains. And the next thing you know, we're arguing and fighting and being caustic to people that we love, and we feel they're doing the same thing to us. So the pain teacher can show up inside of us, inside of our relationships, and anything that we've been discussing here falls into the category of Spirit Gym. But really, sometimes we have to detoxify ourselves. We have to abstain. So we may need to take a time out from a person. We may need to not see them in person, but talk to them on the phone or by email because we feel safer that way. Or we may need to just take challenging issues up at a time when we're more equipped to do it in ways that are reflective of adult conversation and engagement, or we degenerate into reptilian territorializing type behaviors, and next thing you know, mother alligator's eating her children, metaphorically. So these are very, very real issues that we've all got to be concerned about. Now, next in my 1, 2, 3, 4 system, as we're discussing the pain teacher here, would be 3. Number 3 equals choices. There's only 3 choices we can make in relationship to any person, place, or thing. The optimal is the one that's best for everybody involved. Now, sometimes the pain teacher shows up in an optimal choice because the ego feels frustrated that it's having to sacrifice something that it wanted for the benefit of the group or the team or the co-workers, whatever it might be. But that's typically the child in us that can't see the bigger picture or can't realize that sometimes we gain more by sacrificing something for ourselves by allowing others to have more. You get athletes, for example, Michael Jordan, great athlete, but was a real ball hog, and that can be sacrificing the chance for other athletes to also contribute and get some love and also play a better game than one man can play. So the optimal choice is generally the best choice that's least likely to invite the pain teacher. But if part of us knows we're making an optimal choice and the other part of us is in pain for doing it, it really gives us a chance to see where our shadow is. And our shadow might show up in ways of lack consciousness, thinking there's never going to be enough. I've got to have more, more, more. It might be showing up in the form of jealousy or insecurity, maybe afraid that somebody else on the team is going to get recognized above and beyond you, or any number of things. So the optimal choice isn't always free from the pain teacher, but it does give us a chance to really evaluate where our shadow may be at or where our false beliefs could be. The suboptimal choice is generally the one that's best for you but causes problems in relationships with people on your dream team, which is the people that are creating something with you, be they family, friends, co-workers, team members, etc. So when we do suboptimal things, we might, for example, have a major tournament tomorrow, but somebody calls you up and says, let's go out dancing tonight. And next thing you know, it's 2:00 in the morning. You're blasted out of your mind on alcohol and cocaine, and you got a championship game tomorrow, and the team really depends on you. And the next thing you know, you're getting benched by your coach for poor performance. And now the team's losing or does lose. And they all know you well enough to know that you did not put the game and the team in high priority. You put serving your own self needs or selfish needs and acted more like a child than an adult. And so it can lead to a lot of problems in relationships, and it can lead to a lot of guilt and shame for people. So the suboptimal choice almost always is a pretty good indicator the pain teacher's standing right close by. Option C, or choice C, we have the optimal, the suboptimal, and our third is do nothing, has 3 options. If we need more information to make a good decision and we don't get it before we make the decision, chances are good the pain teacher will show up, such as if you're buying a car that costs a lot more than you can really afford and you let a salesman talk you into it, before you do the research to see if there's other cars that are rated as just as good in many different ways, but are $6,000 or $7,000 or $10,000 cheaper, you may one day find out from one of your friends at work that, oh, I was going to buy that car too, but I did research and found out the Toyota was far less expensive and actually outperformed that car. Well, now you're kind of stuck because, by that time your car's depreciated enough that you're in the hole either way you go. If somebody wants to marry you and you're in the throes of puppy love or romantic love, but you've never spent 2 or 3 days with their parents to see how you handle them, you haven't met their programmers yet. I tell people if you want to get married to someone, before you do, always spend 2 or 3 days in close quarters with their parents. And if you can't handle that, you've met the people that programmed your partner, and you've also got a good snapshot of the kind of stress you're likely to have to live through once the marketing campaign wears off and the sex isn't so numbing. So needing more information is something that we should pay close attention to, or the pain teacher will come in many ways, such as financial stress or guilt and shame, or making bad decisions about who to be intimate with and things like that. Another approach to doing nothing I alluded to earlier is taking a time out. If we get to the point where we're not able to stay connected to people and seek common ground and find out how we can support each other, and it turns into, criticism and finger pointing and demeaning of the other person, then it's best to call a timeout and just simply say, I can't contribute to the conversation in meaningful ways at this time. Forgive me for bowing out, but I will return when I can contribute in a way that is beneficial to both of us, and then just walk away. And a lot of people will fight like hell to get you back into that argument or fight because they just love to fight, and that's their programming. But you have to be brave enough to decide, do you want more of the pain teacher, or do you want time to go be with yourself and calm yourself and give yourself empathy and compassion and get your head clear so you can contribute meaningfully to the conversation when it is time to do it and you feel ready to do it. The worst option with those three choices, optimal, suboptimal, do nothing, is to be apathetic, which simply means I don't give a shit. Shoot yourself, drink drugs, smoke, do whatever you want. I don't care. And when parents are apathetic to their children, it produces the highest rate of criminality and disease based on the research I've looked into. Being apathetic towards people is worse than being abusive to them, because at least if you're being abusive, you're making an effort to connect in some way. So if we get to the point where we just don't care about anything, it usually means that the pain teacher's been around for so long that we just haven't got the message yet. And so the pain teacher may take you into a conclusion of that, which could show up as suicide, as an example, which is certainly sad because you can't really evolve at that point, not in this dimension anyhow. And so it also induces a huge amount of pain to the people that loved you. So you're just passing the responsibility of your own physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being on to others that now have to resolve the pain within themselves because you're copping out and not participating in your life or in your partnerships or in being creative. And creativity is always a better solution than apathy. So now we come to number 4 in the 1, 2, 3, 4 model. 1 love, 2 forces, yin and the yang. Yin anabolic, yang catabolic. 3 choices and 4 doctors. We've already covered the 4 doctors because I wanted to cover those in relationship to the issues of balance, because ultimately our 4 doctors at their core are both categories of awareness and values. And when it comes to values, it's very important to remember, if you have no values, then you don't know when to say yes or no. For example, it's my value that I only eat organic food unless I have absolutely no choice, and fasting seems to be a lesser ideal option than eating the best of what I can get and using my heart and soul to spiritualize the food to increase its vibration, such as if I'm in the middle of teaching an advanced training program in a foreign country or city, and for some reason I can't get good food, I may choose to eat the chicken or the salad or whatever that I can get access to at a restaurant, because if I fast and I'm not vital enough or stable enough in that interim period to teach effectively, well, then I have to make a choice. So my point being is, my value, I choose organic food whenever possible, tells me when to say yes or when to say no. If I know that I'm going to be traveling on airplanes, well, I know they won't have organic food, so it's my value to carry food with me. And it's very important to remember that your yes has no value until you learn to say no. And there's many ways you can look at that, but one of them is that if you don't have values about your personal needs and your personal space and your personal time, people will keep asking you to do things for them until you're so bled out you just end up either going into a crisis of emotional collapse, or you start getting angry and mean in response because you waited too long and now you're just erupting with emotional reaction. So if we really want to avoid the pain teacher, we need clearly defined 4 doctor values. Doctor happiness are our values around what is happy making for us, what is sustainable, what are the things that we need to choose in order to consciously avoid visits from the pain teacher. Dr. Diet, of course, is food. Dr. Movement is moving our bodies. Dr. Quiet is rest. And we alluded to the emotional and mental correlates to those and ways the pain teacher can show up. But, if we don't take care of ourselves, then typically we start resenting ourselves because we get frustrated that we're saying yes when we really want to say no, which is also the sign of a child, someone who cannot stand up for themselves. People with low self-esteem have a hard time saying no when they need to say no because they're needing other people's approval, or they need others to prop them up all the time to feel wanted, needed, loved, or valued, but they end up resenting themselves because their inner voice, the wise part of them, says, why the hell did you say yes when you really are tired, or you really wanted to be alone, or why did you invite your mother over when you knew she would drive you crazy and you should have just said, no, I need some alone time. So we can also start resenting others, and particularly people that we love. The pain teacher is likely to show up as repression, stuffing our emotions down, grief, resent. And all of these types of reactions from the pain teacher typically lead to adrenal exhaustion if they continue. And then soon enough, we are tired and we're too catabolic to repair ourselves. So that invites disease such as chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, which leads to things like heart disease and other syndromes. So, having worked with a lot of females with breast cancer, for example, one of the most common patterns I see is that they're overly loving to others at the expense of their needs. And they start resenting the people on the inside that they smile at and do things for on the outside. And, being married to a woman like that, you're likely to find that you're having sex with someone that's quite disconnected, doing it as an act of service or obligation, but not an act of love. So these are real issues. I hope that through this series, you've had the sort of aha moments that are necessary to take advantage of what I'm sharing with you here. I've had a lot of visits from the pain teacher, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually in my life, but they've all made me a wiser, more mature, more capable human being that's better at creating what he wants and needs, and also being more considerate of others on my dream team, be it family members, co-workers, etc. I think it's really important that we have to be careful, as I alluded to earlier, to not try to get rid of the pain teacher by shortcuts. There is no shortcut to spiritual growth. We really have the fastest road available is to listen deeply to our heart, to our inner self or soul, and be honest when we're bullshitting ourselves or bullshitting other people, or look carefully at why we're doing the things we're doing, particularly when they're not creating freedom in our lives. So to close the series out, I have a few closing comments that I will share. The pain teacher guarantees consciousness. Consciousness is a psychic substance produced not blindly, but in living awareness of opposites. So the pain teacher comes to make us aware of what we're creating, which is often the opposite of what we actually want, which is an indication that we're acting unconsciously not consciously. Drugs of all types should be used wisely, or the pain teacher will be there. And I have seen this over and over again in my life. I don't know if I mentioned it, but my brother Scott was a drug addict by the time he was in the 7th grade. And ultimately that led to him committing suicide when I was 35, which was extremely painful for everybody in the family. And so we have to be careful of even socially traded drugs like coffee and sugar, which are very, very dangerous if not carefully used. In fact, Candace Pert said processed sugar should be classified as a class 1 drug, equally addictive to morphine and heroin and just as dangerous based on her research. And she was a world famous biochemist. But no, because there's so much money being made off of it in alcohol, they're made legal for reasons of profit. But that doesn't mean just because it's legal that it's wise to lose your way with them. I've also seen huge problems with psychedelic medicines, now more conveniently called plant medicines because it's got less stigma around it. But a long string of people have come to me with their head and life completely scattered from using too many psychedelics and doing too many so-called spiritual ceremonies, and really ultimately using those drugs the same way they use money and power and drugs in the rest of their life. So the pain teacher will show up, and drugs are quite an invitation to the pain teacher if we're unconscious or doing these things for the wrong reasons. As I shared in part 1, creating a pain tree is a wise idea because it helps you identify what sources of injury or pain you may have not completely rehabilitated or had forgotten about that could still be very alive at the level of the unconscious, such as emotional pain or abandonment issues or victim issues or sexual abuse issues or structural challenges that may have resulted. For example, my left leg got broken in 5 places in a cliff diving accident, which resulted in the loss of 5 millimeters of bone in my left leg. And until I realized through having a doctor assess me and actually measure me on x-ray that I had this asymmetry, which was causing torsion in my pelvis. At the time, I was a boxer and a triathlete in the military, and I started having a lot of chronic right SI joint pain. But once I went and saw a NUCA chiropractor, National Upper Cervical Chiropractic Association, and had a comprehensive series of x-rays, which looked at the length of my tibia and fibula, and the total leg length on left versus right, which led to me getting a heel lift. I was in a lot of pain, but once I got that evaluated, I was able to identify that an injury that happened when I was 15 years of age was now still causing me problems that I thought were new problems, but were really knock-on effects from an old problem that was, approximately 15 or so years old. Now, pain may occur as a means of inspiring us to grow our level of consciousness to a higher structure stage so we can see more. The more conscious we are, the more we can see, and the more we can see, the more freedom we can create. And while having more awareness through higher consciousness, it allows us to have more empathy and compassion for those at lower structure stages of consciousness. So ultimately, we can ask ourselves, based on what I shared in part 2, if I remember right, which Jesus is your Jesus? Is your Jesus one that inspires freedom, or is it one that is a lawgiver? As we grow, we see even our own belief system takes on a different shape, tone, color. And as we grow, our belief system usually becomes less closed and more permeable to our perception of what is true for us at that stage of our development. And is your idea of Jesus or any other deity or figure or idol serving your soul and your relationships in reality? And a lot of people overlook that the reality of their ideas and their isms is such that it's not producing freedom for them. We also talked about how the mind, using Randy Weitenheimer's description, is a zero-dimensional reality that is unbound by the laws of the physical universe and may not produce ideas that work well in what he called the one dimension, or the physical dimension of past, present, and future, where we live, which is really our 3D world that we live in. And many on drugs, for example, had the idea they could fly from the tops of buildings, but soon found that what is possible in a zero-dimensional reality, i.e. your mind, isn't possible in a three-dimensional reality. In fact, one of my buddies, when he was in the 11th grade, his brother was in the 12th grade, his brother wanted to play a trick on him, so he put a bunch of magic mushrooms in a tuna and onion sandwich that his mother had made for them for lunch. Well, because they all got lunches made by mom, and he figured, I can hide it in there. And if I remember right, she'd put in some garlic and onions in there. So his big brother knew that he probably wouldn't even taste the mushrooms, so he chopped them up and threw them in there. Well, a few hours later, the fire department came to the high school, and his younger brother was on top of the school roof and was going to jump because he actually thought he could fly, and they had to rescue him. So I could tell you a long list of stories like that. And that's one of the reasons, as a medicine man and anybody that's in the position of the responsibility of leading ceremonies where plant medicines are used, has to be very, very on the ball and know how to handle these types of situations. And when people are using drugs like that, be they natural or unnatural, in places like rock concerts and in public, they're opening the door for very potent visits from the pain teacher and maybe even death. I've known quite a number of people to die using DMT, for example. I know of 6 people that actually died doing DMT, largely because they were not using it intelligently and doing things like taking DMT while in a jacuzzi or a bathtub. And the problem is when you're on those medicines, you forget that water isn't something you can breathe, and the next thing you know, you drowned yourself. Now, God can't come to know itself without agents of consciousness, and we are the agents of consciousness, not to mention that all sentient beings are unique agents of consciousness. A worm has worm consciousness. A bobcat has bobcat consciousness. An eagle has eagle consciousness. A deer has deer consciousness. But humans have a unique type of consciousness, and it's the type that allows them to go against their instincts and against their biological programming and do things like light forest fires and drive drunk, and a long list of things that the animals that we think we're more intelligent than don't do. But until you experience God, capital G, capital O, capital D, unconditional love, God is only a concept. It's an idea, and it's also one that causes a lot of death, shadows, wars, and visits from the pain teacher. So here we're once again back to that idea of mind, and does the map really match the territory? And without an open mind and an open heart, we can easily get stuck in idol worship. And that includes the idea of our fixation, such as believing that Jesus is the only Savior that can get you to heaven, or that we're the chosen ones, or that anybody that doesn't worship our form of Islam is an infidel and therefore should be eradicated. These are all examples of zero-dimensional ideas that don't play out well in a three-dimensional world of relative reality. Belief systems, as I said, are generally closed, territorial, and not open to practices of becoming whole, because most belief systems are either egocentric or ethnocentric, meaning they're belief systems that are held by the individual, egocentric, or ethnocentric, my group, Christians versus Muslims, or Christians versus people in Judaism, etc., etc. And so, to become whole, we need to practice empathy and compassion for all other beings, be they human or otherwise, and seek to resolve things non-violently, as people like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and others have been trying to inspire us to do. Marshall Rosenberg, for example, the founder of nonviolent communication. With life experience, we can learn that there is a much bigger picture or plan unfolding than our ego mind can either grasp or control. And so we learn to listen deeply, to trust, and to look at the bigger picture and be open to the mystery. And I've found in my life that once I got through this transition of working with my soul and learning that my soul would guide me into things that would scare the hell out of my ego, but that by letting go, things almost always turned out significantly better than they would have if I had controlled the outcome, then I learned that it's us that creates most of our problems, but the harmony of the universe and the harmony of life inherently moves towards stability and towards connection and towards growth. So if we're not inherently moving towards stability, connection, and growth, chances are good we're working against natural law or cosmic law or even divine law, whatever that turns out to be. I think the only divine law is love. The rest of it is here to support us in the realization of that. And even the concept of love is one that it takes a long time to really learn the ropes with. There's a lot of different ways of loving and languages of love and models of love. And eventually I'll do some podcasts on that issue because it's so important. Pain can generally teach us more about ourselves than the times when we were coasting along and had it easy. So be wise enough to be the kind of patient that listens and responds affirmatively when therapists and doctors are involved, and be discerning as to which doctors and therapists you choose, or the pain teacher will be a guest in your life until you get honest with yourself about the power of your choices. And I'll give you an example of that I've ran into many times. Many people have gone from one doctor to another doctor and gotten unnecessary surgeries and the same kind of approaches and just rounds and rounds of pills. And I've said to them as a consultant or a therapist, well, why did you keep going to doctors that kept giving you the same kind of approaches when you knew it didn't work last time? And I hear things like, well, they're the only ones that my insurance policy would pay for. And I look at them and say, well, now, how much money have you lost in downtime from work and productivity? And how much do you value your time? And how many hours have you spent chasing around this ghost of healing by listening to doctors that clearly had a closed mindset and weren't really paying attention to what they were doing and probably misdiagnosed you and didn't address the real cause? And some of them realized right then and there that it would have been far cheaper to be more discerning, and even if they had to pay a doctor or a therapist for their time that was more qualified, that it would have been a far better investment in the long run. And that's what it means to take responsibility for yourself. Pain inspires us to go beyond our ego to gain contact with and guidance from our soul. Our soul is directly connected with and intimate with spirit. Remember, soul is the receptive principle, the experiential principle. Spirit is the animating principle or the flow of energy and information that we ultimately engage by acting out or experiencing. And all life is an expression of great spirit. The unfolding of potential is what we could call great spirit or God for those that don't like those types of spiritual words. If you just study physics or quantum physics, there has to be potential for action to emerge. So one definition of energy is potential in motion. So anytime I've used the word God or great spirit, if you didn't like that, just put potential in there, because then there really can be no argument unless you're just in the habit of arguing for the sake of arguing. And that's a great way to find the pain teacher. Pain makes us wiser and more capable of not rushing when making choices, which quite honestly takes a while to learn. It took me a while to learn. I probably didn't really start learning that till, I don't know. Probably really started getting the lesson around 35 and slowing down a little bit. Pain inspires us to get healthier and learn what we need to learn in the process, be it for ourselves or to fulfill soul contracts. Pain opens the door for new relationships and deep learning and growth. Pain inspires the growth of consciousness and ultimately opens the door to true religious and spiritual experiences, not just sitting in buildings, reciting words and singing songs, because we've been programmed to believe that if we don't do it, we're going to be punished by God or any other variation on that zero-dimensional reality that does not really pan out well and produces a lot of pain, dysfunction in relationships, abuse of children, and wars. So we are now at the end of the 4-part series, Lessons from the Pain Teacher. I hope you've enjoyed exploring the pain teacher with me. I hope that the things I've shared help you experience less pain and more freedom, but also inspire you to use the opportunity of pain to work with it and grow with it so that it becomes meaningful in your life. I look forward to sharing much more with you on Living 4D with Paul Chek. If you have deep and meaningful questions you'd like me to address in an upcoming Q&A with Paul podcast, then please email those to questions@chekinstitute.com and just put a note, question for Q&A with Paul on Living 4D podcast, and those will be forwarded to me. And once I get enough of them together and I can select out the ones that I feel are likely to be the most meaningful and juicy for everybody to hear because they're issues that are likely to be common amongst people, then I will do a podcast based on Q&A, and I'll try to do those every so often. It's been a great journey. Pretty much everything I've shared with you has come from my own personal experience and being a therapist and coach and life coach for countless thousands of people in my now 35-year career. So you can know that I've shared things that have been tried and tested. And when you've got 10,000 students around the world that you interact with and instructors that travel the world and a large staff, you have plenty of chances to hear about how the teachings work and how they change people's lives. And I'm very, very confident from the feedback I've gotten that if you try these things and are honest with yourself, your life will definitely change for the better and you will grow deeper into your spiritual relationship with yourself, others, and the world, and even the universe and what's beyond it, the great mystery. So lots of love. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to sharing more with you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Living 4D with Paul Chek. If you enjoyed this episode, you may like to listen to the previous 3 episodes in which Paul talks about other aspects of the pain teacher. You can follow Paul on Instagram and Twitter at Living4D Podcast or on his YouTube podcast channel, youtube.com/Living4D with Paul Chek. You can watch more on Paul's blog at paulcheksblog.com and at the Chek Institute's new streaming channel, chekiva.com.